Hi ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Joel Hunter here today to talk to you about Kant's moral theory. And we are in a section in a series here that I'm doing on normative ethical theories. So we're looking for norms for our conduct, for behavior, and what is the right-making feature or wrong-making feature of our actions. That's what we want to know. So we're looking for rules or tests to help us figure those things out. And we have seen, I've done a couple videos on consequentialism, and so in that system, in that normative theory, it's the consequences or the results of our actions that will determine the wrong or right-making feature of them. And what is it that makes it right? Well, in consequentialism, it is whether it maximizes happiness or well-being generally. So, and then the failure to do that then would be the wrong-making feature of those actions. So it's looking at results as the principle of action, and then the right or wrong-making feature has to do with happiness or well-being. Well, Kant has a very different answer, and in fact what we'll see is this sort of deep conflict between a consequentialist view that looks at results and Kant's view, which looks at our moral duties for their own sake, and something intrinsic about them that does not depend on happiness but has another reason. So what we're going to do is, in this video, we're going to talk about principles of fairness and justice, and in the follow-up video to this one, we'll look at what Kant, autonomy and respect are essential ingredients of Kant's moral theory. And together, they'll give us a nice broad overview of Kant's moral system, and in fact, will I think make it clear why Kant's moral system is one that is very much effective today, or present today. Maybe I should say, because so much of our moral language today, we talk about things like rights and justice and fairness, and those concepts are incidental, if present at all, in consequentialist moral theory, but they're central in Kantian theory. And so I think you'll find that the reasoning behind Kant's system fits very well with the kinds of moral considerations that we have today and that we expect in our society. So with that, let's get right to our slides for today and talk about, well, let me start from the beginning. That would be an idea, right? So let's go to then talk about our fairness and justice considerations in the Kantian perspective. And just as a reminder, I'm using Russ Schaefer Landau's text, The Fundamentals of Ethics. This is published by Oxford University Press. So what Schaefer Landau starts with are some nice, easy to grasp examples of some pretty obvious things that we would take generally as immoral, like, hey, maybe I'll just opt out of paying taxes and instead treat myself, to a new home entertainment system, or take my family on vacation. We could look at, say, a utilitarian calculation of that, and we might be able to justify that as actions that do maximize overall happiness. They're optimistic, and that we would be hard pressed to show, how it negatively affects others. Okay, overall welfare, overall well-being. So, for example, if I'm only keeping maybe $1,000 in my pocket to do that, but the IRS collects $1 trillion. I mean, that's less than a drop in a bucket. So who's going to notice? Well, what about, traffic getting back home is just going to be horrible. So I'll just run the emergency lane. Go whatever speed I want to, because nobody gets in that unless there's a wreck. But I can get home quicker. I can avoid all this traffic, and I can get home quicker. Okay, so what's wrong with that? I'm not going to hurt anybody, and I get what I want. I get the good result. I'm happier as a result of that. You know, we want to say that, wow, you know, there's still something wrong about those actions. And the questions that Kant would and did ask about why those are wrong is that, look, you know, what if everybody did that? Why is it permissible for me to make an exception of myself in those two examples? I'm exempting myself from the tax rules that everybody else, I expect, needs to obey and ought to, and I'm exempting myself from traffic rules that I expect everyone else to obey, right? So I'm making an exception of myself, and that seems to, it's only going to be successful if everybody else is obeying the rules. And so that's inconsistent. I am allowing an exception for myself to violate a rule that everybody else has to obey. And if they didn't, I wouldn't be able to get what I want. And that's going to be the key move. So what if everybody did that? Well, you know, there would be a serious problem in traffic, right? I would no longer be able to run the emergency lane whenever I want if everybody else did it. What if everybody else didn't pay their taxes and bought a home entertainment system instead? Well, then, you know, all of our society would crumble, right? Think of all the things that would not get paid for or get done. Okay, so you can use, and this is going to be crucial for applying Kantian tests to things, is you have to use your imagination to answer this question. What if everybody did that? You know, what if everybody took that action that you proposed to do? The other question we can ask, and that is often asked in this context, is the test of the golden rule. That is, how would you like it if someone did that to you? So, in other words, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Okay, so both of those questions raise this issue of fairness and consistency, but neither provides a foolproof test of the morality of actions. And I encourage you to look in your text about the explanation for that. One in particular that I'll highlight when it comes to the golden rule are what he calls the self-regarding actions. That is actions that only regard yourself. Okay, the golden rule has to do with our actions that affect one another, that affect others, right? And how I'm affected by others. But what about those that are only self-regarding? For example, we think that perhaps we have a moral duty to use all the talents that we have, right? And to better ourselves, maybe to better others. But that's a self-regarding action, to make the most of my talents. Okay, it doesn't seem like the test of the golden rule really applies to that. Okay, well, I want to point out that one because I do need you to know what a self-regarding action is, and so make sure that you do look at that in considering how these tests are inadequate of themselves. They're not foolproof. There are going to be exceptions to them, and we want to try to limit the exceptions as far as possible. And so that gets us to what Kant is going to propose as a test for why those examples that I gave at the beginning are unfair, and that is the principle of universalizability, which, I don't know, it has about 23 syllables in it, and it's a mouthful, but it's also very abstract when you start to try to pin it down. But I think we can do that, and we will. So, just to underscore Kant's intuition is that consistency, and that deals with our reasoning, and fairness are at the heart of morality. And so for Kant, the key to that is going to be the principle of universalizability. So what that states is that an act is morally acceptable if and only if its maxim is universalizable. Okay then, well that just sort of moves us on to to some different concepts that we need to pin down, namely what is a maxim, and then we can pin down what does universalizable mean here. Okay, so let's first of all talk about a maxim. This is really, really essential to Kant's moral theory. So a maxim is simply a principle that you give yourself for an action. And that is, it does two things. So it states what you're going to do and why you're going to do it. Okay? So whenever you act, a maxim describes what you intend to do and your reason for doing it. So it's the two parts to a maxim. Okay? So Kant argues that an action's rightness will depend on its maxim. So it's not results, in other words. If you want to find what's right or wrong about an action, don't look at the results. You look at the intention of the action and the reasoning for the action, the justification for it. So, morally speaking, it's our intentions and our reasons for action that matter, not the results. Okay. Now, and here's why, for Kant, that's the case. Results often aren't in our control, but our intentions and our actions, and our reasoning for those intentions are within our control. Okay, so rightness of actions is going to depend, for Kant, what is in our control. We're going to talk about that in a video that follows this one when we talk about autonomy. Now, we can, according to Kant, control which maxims will govern our actions. What we can't always control are the results of our actions. And this is important because this gets around some of the problems with consequentialism in trying to understand, how whether results, which results count, the ones that are actual or the ones that are meant or are that are only intended. This, this solves this little problem here. It gets to the point, it gets to the heart of intention as being essential to the right or wrong-making feature of our actions. Okay, so now though the question is, well, wait a minute, which maxims are good ones? Now I gave you a maxim at the beginning with those two examples, so let me repeat one of those. So my maxim for driving is going to be today I'm going to use the emergency lane to get around traffic. That's what I intend to do. And why am I going to do it? So that I can get home quickly or more quickly and I'm not stuck in traffic. Okay, so that's a maxim. Is it a good one? Well, for Kant, good ones are maxims that are universalizable. And that is the question of, wait, what if everybody does it? Okay, so let's look at that test of whether a maxim is universalizable. First thing you have to do is formulate your maxim clearly. You got to state what you intend to do and why you intend to do it. And that's what I try to do with the example. Now imagine a world in which, and use your movie voice there, imagine a world in which everyone supports and acts on your maxim. Okay, remember, what if everyone agrees, oh yeah, you should totally use the emergency lane, when there's a traffic jam to avoid the traffic jam and get home quicker. Yeah, you should do that. I support that. And then not only do they support it, but they act on it too. Everybody does it. Now ask yourself the question. You've imagined this world, right? Now ask yourself this question. Okay, now can the goal of my action to get home sooner be achieved in such a world? Answer, no. Because now everybody else not only supports on principle, using the emergency lane whenever it suits me, but that they do it too. They act on that maxim. The same maxim that I've made for myself. It's not universalizable because then it would frustrate my goal. Okay, so a maxim is universalizable if one's goal could be achieved in a world in which everyone acted on that maxim. So that's steps 2 and 3. So according to Kant, your action is morally permissible only if the answer to the third question is yes. Can the goal of my action be achieved in such a world? If it's yes, then your action is morally permissible. Okay? Good. What that shows then is that if we pass this test is that we are not making exceptions of ourselves. The whole problem with, or not the whole problem, but one of the problems with me using the emergency lane when it suits me to avoid traffic and to get home sooner is that I'm making an exception of myself. It only works if everyone else obeys the other rule, okay? Not if they follow my maxim. Okay, so let's look at the lying promise and see another example here of how this is supposed to work. So suppose I have this maxim that I'm going to lie to my friend in order to escape from being hurt. So I want to, I want to avoid, getting punched, for saying that, for telling my friend the truth, or I'm afraid of getting punched, or maybe I'm afraid of being ridiculed. So I'm going to lie to my friend in order to escape that harm, that unpleasantness. Now, if I apply the universalizable principle, or universalizability principle, what do? Well, here's my maxim. I've got it formulated clearly enough. Now, imagine a world in which, remember our second principle, in which everyone supports and acts on this maxim. Now, if everyone lied when it was convenient, in other words, to avoid something unpleasant, no one would trust the promises of others, right? Because you wouldn't know if someone is telling you something because, say, in the case of a promise. So maybe my promise was, hey, oh yeah, I'll totally be there for you when when you need me, or now let's just stick with that. That you promise to show up at a certain time, for example. Okay, but I've only told you that because if I actually do show up, then I'm going to get hurt, and or if I keep that promise, then there's going to be some bad thing that happens for me. There's going to be some unpleasantness for me. So, if everyone then lied when it was convenient, like to avoid something unpleasant, then you could never trust the promises that other people make. That's what happened in that world. Now, then the third test, remember, can the goal of my action be achieved in such a world? So in such a world, though, lying would be ineffective, because it's only effective when there's a background of mutual trust and honesty. So that's how it is that we tend to trust the promises of our friends and others, because of that background of trust and honesty. We've got to have that in order for promises to work at all. And so there would be no reason to trust the promises, and no one would trust the promises of others. And then, therefore, I would thwart my goal of escaping from being hurt. My promise would not be believed. If I was going to get you money, say I promised to get you some money, and it turned out to be a lie, then again, I'd never be able to get the money. I'd never be able to get you the money, and I'd never get to be able to get the money that I wanted as a result from other promises. And so the purpose of me making the promise in the first place would be defeated. And so the maxim is not universalizable. And that is what makes the action immoral. I'm making an exception to myself in this maxim. I'm treating you unfairly in order to get something that I want. And but the problem is, if I make that universalizable, then my own my goal is thwarted, and so the action is immoral. Okay, so Kant argues that acting on a maxim that can't be universalized, like the one we just looked at, is self-contradictory, since we're assuming that we're exempt from rules that apply to everyone else, and that it thwarts the very goal that we set out to achieve. And so he concludes then that immoral conduct then is irrational. Okay, so this is an interesting claim, because it seems like there are some obvious counterexamples to it, and your text goes into some of those. The example of the ruthless contract killer, for example, this is on page 166 of the third edition. It's definitely worth thinking about, where the the ruthless contract killer is someone who knows exactly what they want, so they can formulate the maxim. Okay, I'm going to assassinate this individual so that I get this huge payout, right? So I'm gonna get what I want from it. I know, and moreover, the contract killer knows exactly how to do it, and they can execute it without fail. Okay, they don't get caught. So the morality of the action never entered into his calculations. In fact, he can know that what he proposes to do, to assassinate somebody, to kill somebody, is immoral. And what happens, though, is that doesn't really faze him at all. It doesn't affect him. So how is his reasoning flawed, if that's the case? What is gone wrong in his... How is that irrational, then? Well, this is the amoralist challenge. And amoralism is... don't confuse amoralism with non-moralism. So a non-moralist doesn't believe that right or wrong exist. All right, so a non-moralist thinks there's no such thing as right or wrong. An amoralist does think that there's such a thing as right or wrong. It's just they don't care what is right or wrong. So the way to remember that is, remember amoralist and apathetic, the two A prefixes. Those will help you remember the connection. So the amoralist believes morality exists, but is indifferent. They're apathetic about the morality of actions. Okay, and so the ruthless contract killer is an example of this individual. Their reasoning to do something is so that it will get them what they want. And the moral duty to not kill people interferes with their getting what they care about. All right, so for the amoralist, then, this individual lacks a reason to do their moral duty, that is, to not kill people. So then, since they lack the reason to do their moral duty, then violating that moral duty can be perfectly rational. So the ruthless contract killer, we can say, is perfectly rational. And so that seems to be a problem for Kant's position here. This is a challenge for him to connect morality to rationality and to defend the claim that immoral conduct is rational. And Kant's strategy for meeting this amoralist challenge is to make a distinction in two kinds of imperatives. Now, imperative is just a fancy word for what reason tells us to do. And so we've looked at that in the case of the ruthless contract killer. What reason tells the ruthless contract killer to do is to assassinate this individual so they can get the payoff, right? So they get what they care about, get this big amount of money. What Kant calls this is a hypothetical imperative. So a hypothetical imperative is one that is doing whatever it is to get what you care about. So they can tell you how to achieve your goals, and they can tell you then what is going to get in the way of achieving those goals, right? The question will be, and your let me see if I can come back to what I wanted to say about this. So the question, though, is, look, okay, I have reasons to, the ruthless contract killer, that is, has a reason to pull off this assassination, to take out this contract and fulfill the contract. The question is it a moral reason? And how does the moral reason apply in this situation? How is it always the strongest reason? That's what Kant's got to do. Because the hypothetical imperative for the contract killer is not the strongest reason. That's not what his reasoning is telling him. So what should his reason be telling him when it comes to the moral reasons? Well, that's what a categorical imperative provides. The categorical imperative are the requirements of reason that apply to everyone who possesses reason, regardless of their desires. So it undercuts that restriction that reason is tied to only getting what we care about. Instead, it places, and the reason is that would be a very, that would be a value that would wax and wane. It would come and go. It could change tomorrow. What do I care about? I mean, that's not something that we can pin down. Desires change all the time. And so then the rational requirements for what I ought to do, those will change as well. They might completely disappear. So the commands of the hypothetical imperatives, the commands of reason that tell us what to do in order to get what we want, depend just on that, on what I want. But the problem is that can change. Well, what about things that change, that don't change, or at least that change far less frequently, let's say? Well, the things that never change would be the categorical imperatives. They're going to apply always, in every case, under the condition that the individual possesses reason. So it gives us the moral reasons that are more important than the reasons that we have because we care about getting what we want out of something, out of achieving some action. Okay, so what Kant is saying then is that all moral duties, like the duty not to kill somebody, for example, are categorical imperatives. Okay? And so they apply to us precisely because we are rational beings. And so even if we suffer as a result of acting on the categorical imperatives, even if we don't get what we want as a result of it, we ought to do it because that is the only way to honor, put it that way, it's the only way to self-respect our rationality, that we are rational beings. And it's only this feature, the rationality, our rationality, that is universal. Everyone who can reason has to obey the commands of morality. Okay, so if moral duties really are categorical imperatives, then we're going to only act rationally when we act morally. And conversely, if we act irrationally, then we act immorally. Okay, so that's what the argument here is, the argument for the irrationality of immorality. This is the answer to the amoralist challenge from Kant. And you should be able to recognize this argument. And the key premise, the one that is going to be challenged, is going to be the third premise. The first two are fairly straightforward, not problematic. Consistency is a feature of rationality, and yes, universalizability is as an example of such consistency. So all of that is well and good, first two premises. The third principle, though, is the big move. It's if you obey the principle of universalizability when it comes to your maxims, then you act morally. Okay, so that's the key move. And so now what we have to do is we have to assess the principle of universalizability and see whether it gets us from morality to rationality. Okay, so consider this maxim. Kill anyone who damages your lawn. It's sort of extreme, isn't it? But it's certainly a maximum. It's a well-formulated maxim, and we can imagine a world in which everyone supports it and acts on it. Well, here's the thing about this one. Because the condition is something that may not occur that frequently, the damaging of a lawn, where someone damages my lawn. Since it occurs infrequently, it's not so hard to imagine everyone acting on that principle and it not interfering with my goal, which is to not have my lawn damaged. Okay? So it seems like this would be a maxim that is universalizable, and I encourage you to think about why that would be. But it's still, intuitively at least, it seems wrong to act on this maxim. This does not seem, kill anyone who damages my lawn, that does not seem like a categorical imperative, that I violate my rationality by not acting on it. Okay, so it seems like it would be wrong to act on it, so why isn't it a categorical imperative? It seems universalizable, okay? But maybe it's not. Maybe it's not, and I encourage you to evaluate whether it is universalizable. That might be one way that Kant could respond. Another way that Kant might respond is to appeal to some other principle, and that's what we're going to get to in the next video. But that is, I'm going to leave that as an exercise for you, is to see whether whether the principle of universalizability fails because there are maxims like this that seem to be universalizable but that still violate our deepest sense of morality. Okay, so now I want to conclude by talking about what Kant considers to be absolute moral duties. So for Kant, there were certain moral rules, like never lie, that are absolute. That means that you can never permissibly break them. They are always ought to be obeyed without exception. That's what absolute means here. They are exceptionless. So in any conflict then between moral duty on the one hand and other demands, say, obeying the law, or maybe duties of self-interest, or demands of self-interest, or maybe a tradition, whenever those kinds of demands conflict with our moral duties, then morality always wins for Kant. Okay, and so the issue is going to be that, and this is what the principle of universalizability will get you, but the problem then becomes, well, what about conflict with other moral duties? Not with the other kinds of demands that we can imagine and we are familiar with, like law or self-interest or tradition, but what about conflict within moral duties? Like, for example, a duty, not to, let's see, on the one hand, a duty to not lie, right? To never lie, but then also a duty to, let's say, prevent the harm to another person. And Kant's famous example is the murderer who comes to your door, who demands to know whether his intended victim is in your house, and the victim is in your house. So what do? Do you lie or not? Well, that's a perfect example of how moral duties can come into conflict with one another. We have two then absolute moral rules now that are in conflict with one another. Now Kant didn't address this issue, and that is one of the weaknesses, is that he instead looked at why it's still why he thought he had a very limited view of why people lie. For example, he didn't consider that people would lie out of a moral duty to prevent harm to an innocent person. Instead, he always looked at it as something that you're benefiting yourself. So self-regarding, in other words, self-interest is why people lie. But that's actually not required by his very own principle, the universalizability. And so that's where our discussion today concludes, and that's what I want you to pick up for next time. We're going to get over into, we have to say more about this issue of rationality, because we kind of left that unfinished. We just sort of stated as a brute fact that we're rational and that's the justification for our moral duties, or that's what connects us to why moral duties are more important than any other kinds of considerations for our actions. And so what we need to do is we need to flesh out that a bit more and explain. Kant needs to explain, what that connection between morality and rationality more clearly. And that's what we're going to do when we talk about the issues of autonomy and respect. And we're going to see how another principle has to come alongside the principle of universalizability, namely the principle of humanity, in order to round out Kant's moral system. And that's what we're going to talk about in the next video. So I hope to see you then. For now, take care. Again, Dr. Joel Hunter, and talking with you about the introduction to ethics and normative theory in particular. And I'll see you next time for Kant on the issues of autonomy and respect.